a minion.
Before the meeting.
Yeah. Okay. All right, here we go. Good Shabbos, everyone. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Bein Yuven v'nei Yisrael Oti leolam, oti leolam V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai es ha-shamayim v'et ha'aretz v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Uvayom hashvi shavat v'nafash Shavat v'nafash Shavat v'nafash V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei Beria Gafen Amen L'chaim. Okay, blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei. Amen. Okay, good to see you. We are starting Deuteronomy today. So we're going to look at chapter 2, beginning with verse 1 of Deuteronomy. Have any of you ever been in Jerusalem to the German colony, the area that's known as the German colony? It's over now. Never used to stay in that area, but there's a beautiful, the new hotel, the Orient, is in that area. It's actually become my favorite hotel in Jerusalem. It's just a beautiful hotel, the breakfast out of this world. And it's near this new area, not so new anymore, but this new area called the Tachana, where it used to be an old, like, Turkish train station that they've turned into restaurants and shops. And you know, it was never like a great place to stay for a hotel, but now that whole area is there. It's really fun. But there's the main, it's also where, if you go all the way down, you get to Talpiot, which is where Kol HaNeshama, the Reformed synagogue, is. So maybe you've walked down that street or not. When I was living there, we used to go there a lot because there were a couple of restaurants there, and it was a fun place to hang out. And the Waffle Lady was there. Have any of you ever been to the Waffle Lady? Babette. She's a Belgian Jew who made Aliyah many, many, many years ago. And she has this little store there where she makes the most unbelievable Belgian waffles with all kinds of toppings. And there's at night they'll line out the door. So we used to go there a lot when we lived there, back when I would eat that kind of stuff. Anyway, the road, so it's called the German colony because there were German Templars at one point who settled there, maybe in the 1800s. I forget when they came. But the main street there that runs through the German colony is called Emek Rephaim. It's a famous, it's like a boulevard of Jerusalem. Everyone in Israel knows about it. Emek means, anyone know? Emek. Oh, Emek. Like valley? Valley. Emek is a valley with an ayin. And Rephaim, Emek Rephaim, it's a biblical reference. What is Rephaim? The Rephaim are what? What are Rephaim? Giants. The valley of the giants. But Rephaim really means, Rephaim, I mean, we refer to that word as the giants. But what it really means are people who come from Rapha. Now, Rapha is probably something you never thought about or heard of. But maybe you remember from the current war, Rafah. Remember Rafah?
Yeah.
All eyes on Rafah. You know, Joe Biden said, don't go into Rafah. So we didn't go into Rafah. And then we went into Rafah. And everything he said that would happen didn't happen. Right? Rafah. So Rephaim are really people who come from Rafah. Now in Hebrew, it's not called Rafah, it's called Rafiach. But it's referred to biblically as well sometimes as Rafah or Rafah. And it refers to that area that is presently in the Gaza Strip. And so Rephaim means people who at one point or another at least were from Rafah. Now later on, those people who are just simply from Rafah become referred to as giants. Now, one of the things we know, you've heard of the giants, right? You know, not New York. So, not San Francisco either. So sometimes you hear that the spies were afraid to go to the land of Israel because there are giants there. Right? There are these massive, enormous people. And I don't know about you, but I sort of always wondered, really? Were they in fact giants, or were there just a lot of them? Was it just well fortified? Or were the people all there like 12 feet tall, 15 feet tall, like these enormous giants? And, you know, one example of someone who could be, you know, gives us this idea that there are giants in the world is Goliath, right? David and Goliath. And there's this idea biblically that there's this guy named Goliath. There's also this guy named Samson. Now, we don't know how big Samson was, but he was able to defeat thousands of people just by himself. And so what is it? I don't know about you, but I always wondered, when they were afraid of the giants, were there really giants? Yeah?
Perhaps it's metaphorical.
Yeah, so I'm speaking rhetorically now. So I'm setting it up. You're new to my classes, but I'm setting it up. So, but yeah. But maybe you've considered the idea that, I don't know, I mean, we've heard there's giants, right? So what are they? What are these giants? So one way to figure out what these giants are is to look at the different places where Rephaim are mentioned throughout the Tanakh. And the reason that I bring it up today is because when you start Deuteronomy, we have references to it right away. Okay? So as we're in the second triennial cycle, chapter 2, we're immediately going to get to a reference about this and try to figure out who these people are and where they came from, because they have a very significant influence on the Jewish people. In other words, there might not have been the book of Numbers if they didn't exist. Because the reason we have the book of Numbers and the 40 years of wandering is because the Jews were afraid to go to Israel because these giants were then in the land. And one of the things the spies say is, we appeared as like grasshoppers to them, which means that we look really small to them, which is an indication that they're really, really big. Now, there is the description of one giant who does survive, and his stature, meaning his height, is actually defined in the Torah, how tall he is, which we're gonna look at in a second. So it's interesting to figure out, but there's something about these giants that we can learn that I think is very germane to what's going on in the world today with regard to Israel and our past and our future, which is really fascinating. And when I found it this week, I was blown away. And I think you will be too, but it's going to take a little while to get there. Okay, so let's take a look. Chapter 2, verse 1 of Deuteronomy. That's where we'll start. Anyone have a page number and plow? 1327. Okay. Ready to go? All right, here we go.
We marched back into the wilderness by way of the Sea of Reeds, as the Eternal had spoken to me, and skirted the hill country of Seir a long time. Then the Eternal One said to me, "You have been skirting this hill country long enough. Now turn north and charge the people as follows. You will be passing through the territory of your kin, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir. Though they will be afraid of you, be very careful not to provoke them, for I will not give you of their land so much as a foot can tread on. I have given the hill country of Seir as a possession to Esau. What food you eat you shall obtain from them for money. Even the water you drink you shall procure them for money. Indeed, the Eternal your God has blessed you in all your undertakings. God has watched over your wanderings through this great wilderness. The Eternal your God has been with you these past 40 years. You have lacked nothing."
Okay, so we're describing so far the journey towards Israel, specifically the end of the journey as we make our way towards the east bank of the Jordan River. And the Jews came, from around Eilat. And if you think about what's east of Eilat, that's the Seir region. And then they came up north to two lands called Ammon and Moab, which is today Jordan. And all of those areas were the areas that were given to Moab and to Esau and their families. And they're related to the Jews. And God gave them those lands. And they said Moab is from Lot. And Esau, obviously, Esau, Jacob's brother. So God said, you guys are going to get land too. You're not going to get land in Israel. You're going to get land on the other side. But God said to them, I'm giving them this land. So he said to the Jews, leave them alone. I gave them that land. That's their land. Leave them alone. If you take food or water or whatever for them, pay them market value. Try not to get ripped off. But pay for whatever you take and make your way, because you're going to go through their land, not to bother them, not to take their land, but to make your way into the land of Israel. So we're just sort of marching the way we go so far. Okay, so that's what we've said so far through verse 7, and now let's pick up in verse 8.
We then moved on, away from our kinsmen, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir, away from the road of the Arabah, away from Elath and Ezion-Geber, and we walked on in the direction of the wilderness of Moab.
Right, Eilat. You heard of Eilat? It's been there for a long time. We Jews have been there for a long, long time. Some people, we just came 100 years ago from Poland. We were having such a good time in Poland that we said, you know what? Let's, it's too much fun here. Let's, okay. That's only if you read the New York Times. All right, let's keep going.
And the Lord said to me, do not harass the Moabites or engage them in war, for I will not give you any of their land as a possession. I have given Ar as a possession to the descendants of Lot.
Right. Pretty good colonizing, huh? Didn't take anything that's not ours. Okay. But we're colonizers, don't forget. In case okay. All right.
It was formerly inhabited by the Emim, a people great and numerous and as tall as the Anakites.
Okay. So now we have another term besides Rephaim for giants. And here, the word in Hebrew for huge, like it's a huge sail, is anak. It's a very common word in modern Hebrew. And anakim is plural of people who are large in size. Okay? So as you come now through this area, this was an area where there are really large people. Okay? And now why do I make a connection between the Anakim, which in English, Gesundheit, is referred to as the Anakites, and the Rephaim, which are just people from Rapha, who are also very large? Well, the last word in verse 10 is the Anakim, but look at the first word in verse 11. Okay, let's keep going.
Like the Anakites, they are counted as Rephaim.
Right, so the Anakites, these enormous people who are living there on the east bank of the Jordan River, are Rephaim. Clear so far? All I'm saying is that there's two words to say the same thing. Anakim, large people, and Rephaim. Now, if you look at the source sheet, first one, if we go all the way back to Genesis in chapter 14, verse 5, it says, in the 14th year, if you remember, there was that battle between the 4 kings and the 5 kings that Abraham got involved with. Shur-Dolamar, or whatever we call it. His friends called him Sher. And the kings who were with him came and defeated the Rephaim at Ashtarot Karnaim, the Zuzim at Cham, and the Emim at Shaveh Kiratayim. Okay, fine, but do you remember the battle of the kings had to do with Sodom and Gomorrah, the king of Sodom that Abraham was involved with? You remember where Sodom is? Like in that sort of the Dead Sea region? Okay? But Rephaim, Rapha, as we know it today, is in the Gaza Strip. This is a battle in the south of Egypt. So the original Rephaim are from Rapha, which today in Arabic is called Rafiach. In Aramaic, it's called Dafiach, because the Dalet and the Resh often switch in Aramaic. There are a couple letters that switch in Aramaic. But what I'm saying is there are Rephaim who are from Rapha. But over here in Deuteronomy, the Rephaim are living on the east bank of the Jordan River. So which is it? Do they live in Jordan, present-day Jordan, or present-day Gaza Strip? And that's a big difference biblically. You know, today it's just an hour or so. To schlep, It's also more dangerous today. It's maybe the one place on earth that's more dangerous today than it was 3,500 years ago. Are the Rephaim from Rapha, or are the Rephaim from the east bank of the Jordan River, meaning Jordan today? Do you see my problem? I have a people called Rephaim in Genesis who live by the Gaza Strip, which is where Rapha is today. And I have a people called Rephaim in Deuteronomy who live outside the biblical borders of Israel, across the Jordan River, on the east bank of the Jordan River, which is today Jordan. Okay, clear so far? Okay. Now, there's also another nickname for them. If you didn't have enough nicknames, like the giants, the Moabite, at the end of verse 11, what the Moabites call them? The Emim. Right? What's that? What's an Emim? Okay, so if you look at Rashi, let's see, Judy, would you mind reading that? You see the second source on the sheet?
Also accounted Rephaim as the Anakim. As Rephaim are those Emim accounted even as the Anakim, who are also termed Rephaim because the hands of everyone who beheld them became weak.
Right. Rapha, the word Raph, anyone know the word Raph in Hebrew? What's a Raph? Paul's not here. A Raph is a threshold. Right. That's what it means in modern Hebrew. And it could be like that's your threshold, and if you exceed it, you can't take it anymore, which means it's a weakness. And that's kind of what Rapha means. And Rashi tells you that. If you look at Rashi, he says, they were termed the Rephaim because the hands of everyone who beheld them became Rapha, became weak. That's what Rashi says. Meaning that everyone thought the Rephaim were these big, strong, powerful people, which indicates maybe they were giants. And then they were so strong that they had another nickname, the Emim. Okay? So called because of emim in Hebrew, the word ema means to be scared. Don't think it's from ima. That would be with an aleph at the end. This is with a hey at the end. It would make sense because Moav comes from father, right? Moav from father, because Lot had relations with his daughters, and they produced the Moabites, right? And that's why they're called Moav, because they're from. We did that class. But here, so you might have thought my first feeling was, wow, Moav and Emim. I bet it's totally different. But Ema means like the dread or the fear of. And so they call them Emim because they were fearful of them. So these people are so scary that they're called the Rephaim, which means you get weak because of them. They're called the Anakim because they're giants. They're called the Emim because you're afraid of them. These are scary folks, right? These are scary people. And we're still wondering, what was it about them that made the spies so afraid of them, about these giants that we ended up having to wander in the wilderness for 40 years? What is it about them that's so scary? Is it simply that they're enormous? I'm not sure.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I guess I need this. A question there, though, because God keeps reminding them that these are people who were gifted land by God because they're descendants of Esau. So they're enemies, but they're not enemies.
Yeah, so we're not even saying that. Look who calls them that. The Moabites called them the
But
Emim.
God's still protecting them.
Yeah. By the way, this generation of Jews that Moses is talking to in Deuteronomy is not scared of them. It was their parents who were scared of them, but they all died in the wilderness. They're dead. The ones who were afraid to go are dead. These Jews are ready to go fight, and they do. They're not afraid anymore. Well, I mean, maybe they are, but they go to fight. The ones who were afraid are now dead. Right? This is Deuteronomy.
Well, the ones that were afraid had a history back in Egypt. They always wanted to go back. And the new ones that were born,
Yeah,
they had no history back, so they needed to go forward.
exactly. But the ones who called them the giants and said we look like grasshoppers, that was the spies of a different generation. Okay. All right, let's keep going. We're verse 12. Verse 12.
Similarly, Seir was formerly inhabited by the Horites, but the descendants of Esau dispossessed them, wiping them out and settling in their place, just as Israel did in the land they were to possess, which the Lord had given to them. Up now, cross the Wadi Zered. So we crossed the Wadi Zered. The time we spent in travel from Kadesh Barnea until we crossed the Wadi Zered was 38 years, until the whole generation of warriors had perished from the camp, as the Lord had sworn concerning them. Indeed, the hand of the Lord struck them to root them out from the camp to the last man. When all the warriors among the people had died off, the Lord spoke to me, saying, "You are now passing through the territory of Moab, through Ar. You will then be..."
Right, and you remember, I think I taught you this last year, who came from Ar? The pirates, right. So, right. This is where most of Major League Baseball got their names. The Giants, the Pirates. Okay.
And the Gurites also. You will then be close to the Ammonites. Do not harass them or start to fight with them, for I will not give any part of the land of the Ammonites to you as a possession. I have given it as a possession to the descendants of Lot.
Okay, so now we know that Lot is, we've repeated this already a couple times. You're not going to get this land. By the way, why does it keep repeating this land? Because Reuben and Gad wanted to go over and live in that land. And so we had to talk about it a little bit. We dealt with that last week or the week before. But here now I want to just point out verse 20 one more time, because we have one more reference here to the Rephaim in verse 20. Okay, Ed? Verse 20?
It too is counted as Rephaim country. It was formerly inhabited by Rephaim, whom the Ammonites called Zamzumim.
Okay, so now we have another nickname for the Rephaim, because the Ammonites called them the Zamzumim. Why do we need so many nicknames for these people? Who are these people? Okay, and by the way, look what, this is a phenomenal verse, verse 20. It's considered the land of the Rephaim. The Rephaim used to live here, but guess what? They're gone. They're not there anymore. Where are they? Are they in Gaza? Are they on the east bank of the Jordan River? Well, they used to be on the east bank of the Jordan River, but according to verse 20, they're not there anymore either. So where'd they go? Who are these people? Okay, so two commentaries on it. First Rashi, and then Nachmanides. Ed, would you mind reading the third and fourth source on the sheet?
Sure. Rashi. It, Ammon, also was accounted a land of Rephaim. It also is accounted a land of Rephaim because the Rephaim formerly dwelt in it, but yet it is not that land which I gave to Abraham.
Okay, so Rashi is just saying it was accounted, this land, the Rephaim. They were allowed to be there because it's not holy land, and I sent the Rephaim out that way, but they're gone. So where'd they go? And why were they called the Zamzumim as well? So to figure that out, we have to go to Nachmanides, the Ramban.
Rephaim, since they were part of them, and they were as the Anakim, and therefore the Moabites called them Emim, because of their dread, like that of the Anakim, the giants, lay upon the people. This is the correct interpretation.
All right, so you know what Ramban says? What Ramban usually does is he first points out Rashi.
Right.
And here he says, you're not going to believe this, but Rashi actually got it right. This is the correct interpretation. Usually he says, yeah, but that's not my view. Okay, but here he's going to give us some more very important information.
Thus the land of Rephaim was very large, and from it Moab and Ammon took their lands. The balance remained for the Rephaim themselves, for Og, who dwelled in Ashtaroth, was of them.
Okay, so Jeff, you anticipated that. Very impressive. Now, Og, I once taught a class, I don't know if any of you probably don't remember it. It was called Og. It might have even been at my old shul. The most interesting man in the world, because Dos Equis used to have the most interesting man in the world, and I thought that Og was actually more interesting than that guy from Dos Equis who could speak Spanish and German, or whatever he could do. I mean, he could do some interesting things, the Dos Equis guy, but he was no Og.
The Miami Heat has a player called Alan O.
Yeah, that's right.
And he was considered a big man. He was over 17.
Yeah, he's descendant. Now, according to the Midrash, Og is the reincarnation of Eliezer, who was the servant of Abraham in Genesis. And he was the one that Eliezer from Damascus, who Abraham sent to fetch and find Rebekah to bring back to marry Isaac, which he did. But on the way, Eliezer fell in love with Rebekah, and he wanted to marry her. And Abraham said, you come from a nation that's cursed, and my nation is blessed, and I can't be mixed with you. And Eliezer didn't appreciate that. And he left and changed his name to Og. Now, I would think you would change your name from Og to Eliezer. Eliezer is a nicer sounding name. I think what happened, this is a very esoteric Talmud in the Yerushalmi, so it's hard to say, is that Eliezer said, if you don't let me marry her, I'm going to change my name. And Abraham said, Og. And Eliezer said, I like it. I like it. So I think that's how it happened, but again, that's the Babylonian Talmud doesn't confirm that. Okay. Now, Og, this guy, survives and ends up becoming a king who doesn't love the Jews and has a not a good history with Abraham now, and he becomes one of these giants, and there were indications that Rashi talks about that Eliezer, Abraham's servant, was a giant, and that he was able to go out and defeat whole armies by himself. and that he was something. And so when we see that there's this now Og who later becomes one of the giants, it's because he descends from them, and he is one of those giants. And so he's the one guy that we have proof of, that Jeff actually pointed out earlier, the one guy we have proof of in the Torah that there may have been giants because we have his measurements, which we're going to get to in a second. Okay, so let's keep going with the Nachmanides, Ed.
Okay. For Og who dwelled in Ashtaroth was of them, as it is stated, and they smote the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Kamaim. And in the book of Joshua it is written, and cut down a space for thyself there in the land of the Perizzites and of the Rephaim. Therefore, Scripture says of the border of Moab and Ammon that it is accounted to the Rephaim, still calling them Rephaim, the name by which they're originally known. The Moabites and the Ammonites were the ones that changed the name to other names, the Moabites calling them Emim, and the Ammonites calling them Zamzumim.
Right. So they're saying the reason they have these names for them is because they refer to them as these people who used to be here, but they don't live here anymore. They've gone somewhere else. Okay. If you skip with me now to Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 1, and let's learn a little bit more about Og and figure out what's an example of a giant. Joe, Shelley, so chapter 3, verse 1 of Deuteronomy.
We made our way up the road toward Bashan, and King Og of Bashan, with all his men, took the field against us at Edrei. But the Lord said to me, do not fear him, for I am delivering him and all his men and his country into your power. And you will do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon.
Right, so particularly what we're saying to the new generation is, you're going to go up against some giants too. But don't fear, I'm with you. And at this point, the other generation would have turned around and said, we're out. We'd rather go back to Egypt or wander in the wilderness. And this generation says, Og, giant, he's one of the Rephaim? No problem. No problem. But God specifically tells him here, don't make the same mistake that you had with your parents. Okay, verse 3.
So the Lord our God also delivered into our power King Og of Bashan with all his men, and we dealt with them such a blow that no survivor was left.
Okay, so why are there no Rephaim anymore? We wiped them out. The Ammonites and the Moabites referred to the Rephaim as these people who used to live here. They were scary people, but you know what? The Jews took care of them. So do you see what happened there? All the fears that we had about going into dealing with the Rephaim when they were in the land of Israel, that the first spies came, well, somehow they moved at some point from inside the land of Israel to outside the land of Israel. And now they're living on the east bank of the Jordan River. And now, not only are you going to have to, you won't have to fight the giants when you get to the land of Israel, you're going to have to fight the giants before you even get to the land of Israel. Because Og and Bashan are coming out to fight you. And so what did the Jews do? They said, okay, we're not going to make the same mistake. And they went and they defeated Og. Now, was Og just one remnant of the Rephaim? Or were all the people with him Rephaim? Maybe he was the only one, and that's why they weren't as scary. We don't know. But either way, these people, I mean, you read in verse 3 that Og and his entire people, there's no survivors left. And so it makes it sound like, based on what we already learned in chapter 2, that the Rephaim who used to live there no longer live there. Either they were all killed or they went somewhere else. But it looks like they were all killed. So far. Okay, clear so far? Okay, it's a lot of material, I understand that. But let's keep going because we want to get to verse 11. So where are we? Verse 4. Verse 4.
At that time we captured all his towns. There was not a town that we did not take from them. 60 towns, the whole district of Argob, the kingdom of Og in Bashan. All those towns were fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, apart from a great number of unwalled towns.
Right, and so that's what the original spies said, except for Caleb and Joshua. The 10 spies came and said, they've got these big fortified cities, they've got these high walls, they've got these big doors, we'll never get in, we look like grasshoppers. And here the Jews come and say, no problem. Different generation, right? But you have a little bit of an explanation in verse 5 of how we dealt with the giants that we were originally afraid of. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, listen, yeah, this was my parents' giants. Lawrence Taylor, Joe Sims. Now they got that quarterback from Duke who throws it to the other team every time. Right, I know what you're thinking. It's not, so, this isn't the Giants that it used to be. Right. It's not exactly Willie Mays in center. All right, whatever. A lot of baseball. Look, my Phillies are in a pennant race. I'm excited. All right, here we go. Some of this is good material. A lot of you are missing it. Verse, where did we get to? 7? 6. Okay, verse 6.
We doomed them as we had done in the case of Shihon, king of Heshbon. We doomed every town, men, women, and children, and retained as booty all the cattle and the spoil of the towns.
Right, because you notice the difference between the land of Moab and Seir that we're not allowed to mess with, but Og, we have a bone to pick with that guy. Take whatever you want, right? Which they do. Okay? Verse 8.
At that time we took the land from the hand of the 2 kings of the Amorites that were on the other side of the Jordan, from Ammon Brook to Mount Hermon. Sidonians would refer to Hermon as Sirion, and the Amorites would call it Seir.
Right, and Hermon, goes all the way up to the Golan. Right? That's where the Israelis go skiing like 3 times a year when it's not being bombed. They took this area, but the reason they needed to conquer this area is because we needed a place for Reuben and Gad to live. Because God did agree to them that they could live over there, but they needed a place to live, so I had to conquer the area. And you couldn't take the land of Seir or Moab, so you could take the land of Og and Bashan, which is where ultimately Reuben and Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh were going to end up living. Okay, verse 10.
All the cities of the plain, the entire Gilead, and the entire Bashan under Salaha and Edrei, the cities of the kingdom of Og in the Bashan. For only Og, king of the Bashan, was left of the remaining Rephaim.
Okay, now, how big was Og? Here we go.
Behold, his bed was an iron bed. It is in Rabbah of the children of Ammon. 9 cubits was its length, and 4 cubits its width by the cubit of the man.
Right, so, which means, it was big, yeah. 13 and a half feet. I mean, he was, could make a good living in the NBA today, right? Yeah, look, could he play defense? I don't know, but it didn't matter. All right. So now we have, Og is still around. The rest of his people are dead, and he's a big dude. He's a huge guy. Rashi on that verse 11. If you look at the bottom of the first page, Stuart, would you mind? I'm sorry, not Rashi. Nachmanides, Ramban. The last source on the first page. For only Og.
Yeah. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the Rephaim. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron, etc. The purport of the verse is to tell that this Og was called the king of the Amorites because he ruled over them. But he himself was of the Rephaim. And in order to tell his height and strength, since the Rephaim were a people great and many and tall as the Anakim, it states that his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. No bedstead of wood being able to support him as it does other people. It is in the city of Rabbah, which was his dwelling place. And when the children of Ammon destroyed the Rephaim, as is mentioned above, and his city, of capital Ashtaroth, was captured, he alone was saved from the hands of the Ammonites. It is this which is stated, for only Og, king of Bashan, remained the remnant of the Rephaim. His bed was left there in Rabbah, which now belongs to the children of Ammon. And the Ammonites preserved it as a testimony that they destroyed a great and tall people.
Okay, so God had, somehow these Rephaim were bad guys. They were led by Og, who became an enemy, who went from serving Abraham to an enemy of Abraham and ran away and changed his name. And when the Jews came to go into the land of Israel, all they wanted to do was cross through the boundary of Bashan. And they said, we're not here to fight. We just want to cross through. And Og and his people went out to attack the Jews, and the Jews defeated them. And then, yeah. Oh, okay. And then, there were others who were on the other side, and they ended up battling with the Ammonites, and the Ammonites defeated the rest of them. But the only one who survived was Og. Now, were the rest of them also really large? And we're not exactly sure. But the one thing that we do know is, so there's two scenarios. One is the Rephaim were wiped out a long time ago, and the only giant left was Og. And he survived until he was captured. And then they captured his bed and they put it in a museum and say, look, they used to have beds like this, but we conquered him. Or there were lots of Rephaim left, but they were all killed here as well with Og, and only Og survived. So those are the two options. Hillary? And then Ken? Can you use the mic?
I have no idea where this comment comes from, but I had written down in an earlier Torah study that there were Rephaim at the time of Noah, but most of them died in the flood. Does this sound familiar to you? I have no idea where this is from.
Okay, so what happened was, there's a crazy midrash on that. That Og, there were Rephaim at the time. And that this is part of, I don't know if maybe you were in my class, Og, the most interesting man in the world. But Og, before he was Eliezer, he lived all the way back to the time of the flood. And he was so powerful and so tall that he was able to survive the flood. And he actually jumped on top of the ark and was like holding the ark and survived. But he was a giant, so he could do these crazy things. And I don't know, he had like these superpowers, and he survived the flood. It's a crazy midrash. I'm not sure the point of it, but except Ken and then Ian.
So how do we always leave one bad guy, like with the with Amalek and Og, alive?
Yeah, well, it's like Darth Vader. You hope someday they're going to take it off and realize, Luke, connection to Luke. I don't know. But Ian, I don't know. That's a good question. All right, let's go. We have only a little time left and a lot of ground to cover still, so let's.
You don't have to be 13 feet tall. If you go into the Dolphins or any of those, and they are big men, and I've worked out with them, they're massive. And they're muscular.
Yeah.
And they have hands as big as catcher's mitts. And remember, we don't have guns and bullets then. We have hand-to-hand combat.
Right.
So, in deference to the spies who got scared, they looked at them and they looked at themselves. They were, 5'7", 5'8", not tall in those days.
Maybe.
It is scary when you see a bunch of them and they're behind walls. You say, we don't have a chance against hand-to-hand combat.
Well, no, I agree with that. However, the one thing that we do say though is the Torah goes out of its way to tell you how tall he was, with the 9 cubits, in which I guess in current he was 13.6 or whatever. Quickly. Yeah.
The spies were right. The spies, original spies, were correct, and they were dismissed, and there was consequences to the whole people because of the report. But the report turns out to be correct. Where they missed out, and the difference now is that they lack the faith in God to be able to fight them successfully,
Correct.
even though indeed they were giants.
Correct.
So these
this new generation had enough faith in God to go into battle with these giants that the other ones didn't have.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, let's try to wrap this up. We have still a fair bit to cover, and we haven't gotten to the good stuff yet. When the Torah's over, when the Torah ends at the end of Deuteronomy, we then go to the book of Joshua. And there's another reference here to the Rephaim, well, at least to the place Rephaim, when we get to Joshua. So Joshua is, we know, the leader who, once Moses dies, leads the Jewish people into the land of Israel when they begin the conquest of Israel. And in chapter 15 of Joshua, it says, then if you look at this verse is on the sheet, then the boundary ascended into the valley of Ben Hinnom. Now, the valley of Ben Hinnom is still there, and it's still called that. In Hebrew, it's called Gai Ben Hinnom, or shortened to Gehenna, or Gehinnom, which is often referred to as hell, Gehinnom. But what the valley is if you go in between where the King David Hotel is, up on the hill, and then there's this valley, and then there's the old city of Jerusalem. That valley that's this valley. Okay, and the reason it's called the valley of Gehinnom, why that name? Ben Hinnom means like no man's land. It comes from the word chinam, free. But the reason it became hell is because the people who worship Molech, who used to sacrifice their children, that's where they used to do it. And so it became like a synonym for hell because there's such a horrible thing that happened there. But today it's a very expensive area. There's a pool. It's called the Sultan's Pool, and there's some restaurants and art galleries, and there's an amphitheater there where they have concerts and so forth. Okay, but that's that area that they're referring to in Jerusalem. Along the southern flank of the Jebusites, which is Jerusalem. I just told you, that's where it is, in Jerusalem. The boundary then ran up to the top of the hill that flanks the valley of the Hinnom on the west, at the northern end of the valley of Rephaim. And that valley of Rephaim extends today into the area that Israelis call the German colony, which is why that street is called Emek Rephaim, the valley of the giants. Because that's the area where at one point they were, which means that there were giants in the land of Israel, but they're not there anymore. They were there, but they're gone. And they were in Gaza at one point too, but they're gone. And they were on the east bank of the Jordan River at one point, but they're gone. But there's lots of different names for them. They might be the Anakites, or they might be the Emim, or they might be the Zamzumim, or they might be Og and his people from Bashan. Who are they? Who are the Rephaim? They refer to different people in different places at different times. But they're all called Rephaim. Okay, so a couple more references to bring this all together. I'm just going to try to race through it. If we skip now to Samuel, there's a 2 Samuel. There's a story at the end of the life of King David. And if you remember, we know there's a relationship between a giant and King David. And that giant is Goliath, or in Hebrew, Goliath, right? It's also a show on Amazon Prime, I think. It's a different topic. Okay, here's what it says, 2 Samuel. Again, war broke out between the Philistines and Israel. And David and the men with him went down and fought the Philistines. And David grew weary. In other words, this is the end of David's career, and he was older now. And Ishbi Benob tried to kill David. He was a descendant of Rapha. So this is much later now. King David's a few hundred years after Joshua. And there's still a descendant who's from the Rephaim who's plaguing David. And his bronze, he was so big, like Og, that his bronze spear weighed 300 shekels, and he wore new armor, which I don't know what that means, but it means he was enormous. Whenever we talk about these Rephaim, we talk about how big they are. Okay. Again, there was fighting with the Philistines at Gob. And Elchanan, son of Yair Uragim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite, whose spear had a shaft like a weaver's bar, which probably means really big. Once again, there was fighting at Gath. There was a giant of a man who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. And if you can't do that kind of math in your head, that's 24 in all. He too was descended from Rapha. Remember, all eyes on Rapha? When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of David's brother Shimei, killed him. Those 4 were descended from Rapha in Gath, and they fell by the hands of David and his men, which means to say that, by the way, if you look in verse 19, you should be really worried, because it says Elchanan, son of Jaar Oragim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath. And we know, wait a minute, I thought David killed Goliath. Well, don't worry, look what Rashi tells you. Elchanan was a nickname for David. Right? So I brought that Rashi for you there. Don't worry, that was David. So here we are thinking at the end of the Torah, or at least at the beginning of Deuteronomy, which is, towards the end of the Torah, that all the Rephaim are wiped out. They lived in different places. Maybe Og survived, but eventually he died, and they hung up his bed and said, isn't this wonderful? Look at this guy we killed. But then many, many years later, another one of these guys who somehow descended from Rapha, or came from Rapha, named Goliath, meets up with David, and David takes him out. And David was a much smaller person, right? I mean, everyone in the world knows when you say David and Goliath, David means the small one, and Goliath means the huge one. And the small one defeats the big one. I mean, everyone knows that. So, well, what is it? Are these guys wiped out or not? So, if we look at the book of Isaiah, there are a couple of references that help us. And this, I think, is really incredible. So, one of the references to hell that we have in the Torah, or biblically anyway, is Gehinnom, Gehenna. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever flown into Columbus, but the first time I flew into Columbus was because I was going to Ohio. It was when I was going to my wife's family. And Ohio to me is like, Ohio, really? I mean, and you get off, you drive out of the airport, and the first thing you see is a city named Gehenna. That's the name of it. I said to him, where am I? It's Ohio. Because, I grew up a Penn State fan. I'm like, these Ohio State, they always were the Devils. And now I'm in Gehenna. Okay, doesn't matter. But there's another name biblically for hell, Sheol. We have this already in Genesis. Going down to Sheol. Sheol means the underworld of hell, right? You've heard that before? Yeah. Okay. Now, Isaiah uses this term. Look what Isaiah says. This is chapter 14, verse 9. Sheol was a stir, meaning something crazy was going on in hell. Like, they knew they were getting some new recruits. To greet your coming, rousing you for the shades of all the earth's chieftains, raising from their thrones all the kings of nations. And then one more verse. I'll explain what this means in a second. They are dead. They can never live. Shades. Shades are, okay, we'll get to that in a second. You know what? I missed the whole point of this. Let's go back to the first one for a second. I don't know how many of you here read Hebrew. But if you do, you're going to love this. Sheol below was a stir. To greet your coming, rousing you from the shades. Now, shades, in Hebrew, shadim means like ghosts of some sort. Shadim. But if you look in the Hebrew, this is why I brought the Hebrew. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you count 9 words. Shades in Hebrew, Isaiah says, are, who are these people who've come to hell? The Rephaim. The Rephaim. So somehow, by the time you get to Isaiah, Isaiah is recounting what happened in the Torah, and he's saying that at one point or another, all of the Rephaim who tried to destroy the Jews got wiped out and got sent to hell. And hell was excited because a new group of recruits that they could torture was coming. Okay, one more reference of Isaiah in chapter 26, verse 14. They are dead, they can never live. Shades, they can never rise. Of a truth, you have dealt with them and wiped them out, have put an end to all mention of them. And here it says, if you look in the Hebrew, the fourth word, metim bal yichyu, dead, they can never rise. They, are unable to live. Who? Rephaim. They're never coming back. Who are the Rephaim Isaiah is referring to? There were these people who were giants, who were so powerful that at one point in human history it seemed that they could never be defeated by the Jews, and that they were. That's who these Rephaim were. And what does that refer to? It refers to when the spies came, they said, they're these giants, we can never defeat them. They're enormous. 40 years later, we come back, see the same people, take them out, send them to hell. We never thought we could defeat them, and today, they're gone. Okay, now just one more reference, and then I'll try to make this all make sense in a way that hopefully you'll be excited about. Okay, so Onkelos was, about 2,000 years ago, the first person to translate the Torah into Aramaic. And he says here, back on verse 23 from chapter 2 where we started, and the Avim who had been living in Chatzerim, Defiach. Defiach is what in modern Arabic Rafa is. Rafa is called Rafiach. Rafiach is what the place was called in Aramaic 2,000 years ago, referring to Gaza. So what he's saying is, all eyes on Rafa, remember that nonsense? So what we have here, Onkelos is telling us 2,000 years ago, there were these giants who lived over there in the Gaza Strip area. Why did I bring you this last Rashi on Deuteronomy? It probably makes the same point. Okay. So here's now what I'm going to say, and I hope you think this is interesting. The Rephaim were not one group of people. The Rephaim were a term that was used whenever there was a group of people that the Jews thought they could never defeat. And that's why there were Rephaim who at one point lived by Sodom. And they were the Sodomites, and we could never defeat them. But ultimately, Abraham went to war with just Eliezer. Abraham didn't have an army, he just had Eliezer. But Eliezer was so strong, he was able to wipe them out because he was one of them. He was like a leader of them. And they all got wiped out, but he survived. And then he got mad at Abraham, so he left Abraham because he wanted to marry Rebekah, and that didn't work out. And he became an enemy of the Jews, and he went to a different people, and he became the leader of them, and they were impressed with him because he was so big. And they became known as the Rephaim, but they were a different people living in a total different place. And the Jews thought we could never wipe these people out, so they went and wandered for 40 years, but then they came back and they wiped them out. Gesundheit. And every time one of these nations got wiped out, who the Jews thought they could never get wiped out, and the Jews were scared of them because they threatened to destroy the Jews, they deserved to be destroyed from history, and they went to hell. And Isaiah tells us every time they went to hell, they went and they survived. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen these T-shirts. They sell them on Ben Yehuda Street. And it says, Babylonians, and then it's crossed out. And then it says Assyrians. I think Assyrians are first, and it's crossed out. Then it says Babylonians, and it's crossed out. Then it says Romans, and it's crossed out. And then it says the Crusaders, and it's crossed out. And then it says the Nazis, and it's crossed out. And then it says the Soviet Union, and then it's crossed out. And then it says Iran, and it says you're next. Although the new ones are now crossed out. But how many times in our history has there been a nation that was so scary and so strong that we, the Jews, could never overcome them? The Romans? Really? They're gone. The Assyrians? They're gone. Babylonians? Huge armies. We're a tiny little vassal state. Babylonians? They're gone. Persians? They're gone. We'll never be able to defeat the Nazis, the strongest power in the world. We're the Jews. We have no power. We're completely powerless against them. They're gone. The Soviet Empire. How could we ever defeat the Soviet Empire? They're gone. And every time they're gone, they go down to Sheol, and there's a big party, and God says, join the club. You're the people who tried to wipe us out. Welcome. We've been waiting for you. We've got a whole party planned. Sheol was a stir because you tried to wipe out my people, and you seemed so big that even my people thought we could never destroy you. But you know what? They didn't destroy you. I destroyed you. You're gone. And every nation that has come to destroy us that seemed too big has taken, you could say that that's nonsense, but Isaiah predicted this a long time ago, and we see it happening. If I would have told you before October 7th, Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, Hamas, the Houthis, they're all going to be gone in a year. No way. They're all going to be gone. No way. No, it's not possible. And now, our biggest enemy are purple-haired freaks at Columbia. And that's what we're afraid of. Are you kidding me? One after another. They've all gone down to Sheol. But what my point is that all our lives we've been wondering, who are these big giants who lived there? All our lives we've been wondering, were they really giants? And the answer is no, they're just people. But there were people who at any given point in history seemed like we could never overcome them. But if we just had faith in God, we could be certain that we will outlast them. They'll go down to a party in hell, and we're going to keep going. And if you don't believe me, just read about the history of the Jewish people and see that it happens over and over and over again. There were never any giants. There were just people that we thought we'd never be able to defeat. But then ultimately we did. And that's what Rephaim are. Okay, Shabbat Shalom.